Well, now we can determine how it is. So we can smile a little bit, be pleasant, see how. Hello. This is now a tape recording, a videotape recording of Mr. Dean Warren, and we'll actually turn the microphone over to him to start his recording at this time. Take it away, Dean.
Thank you, Clarence. That's Clarence Larson, my brother-in-law, husband of Jane Warren Larson. And I understand I'm probably talking to my children, Roger and Guy, and my grandchildren, or great-grandchildren, or whoever. This is middle of October 1983, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of my younger experiences. My father, Stafford Warren, was a vigorous Californian who came off the farm and went to the University of California, the University of California Medical School, where he met my mother. And like most young men of promise, he became associated with someone he looked up to, and Dr. Whipple, and got him into a new field called radiation. And when he finished some graduate work, he went over with my mother to Europe, in fact, and met Madame Curie and toured some of the work that was being done in radiation in Europe right after the end of World War I. Then Dr. Whipple went to the University of Rochester as the dean of the new medical school and took my father with him. And that's where I was born, along with my brother. My sister was born in California. But in any event, my father became probably the leading expert in the United States in the field of radiation. It was one of those fortuitous accidents of history. He was in the right place at the right time, so that when the Manhattan Project came along, he was drafted and commissioned into the Army to be in charge of the medical safety program for the Manhattan Project. And he and my mother and my brother and sister and I moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I was then in a senior in high school, and I transferred down to the new high school in Oak Ridge. I was in the first graduating class at that high school, in which there were 3 boys and 26 girls. It's because that most of the kids in high school were from the construction families in Oak Ridge, and moved around a lot, and were therefore had not progressed very fast in school. So most of the boys were draft age and had already gone into the service because the war was on. Well, after graduation from high school,
you were valedictorian, I believe.
I was valedictorian, but that was due to the fact that this new high school had standards terribly below what I had been used to. Everything was multiple choice. They gave you no problems. I can remember, as a side, playing basketball, and we went around and played all the local towns, and there were fights on the floor because everybody had moonshine whiskey. In fact, in chemistry, I was taught how to do 2 things in that senior high school. One was to distill from corn alcohol, and the other one was to make some gun cotton. So Oak Ridge High School was staffed with local teachers, and Eastern Tennessee in those days had been a hillbilly, very primitive kind of area. So this new influx of Northerners, many of them children of academic achievers, some even Nobel Prize winners, was really a cultural shock to everybody down there and to ourselves. Anyway, I was 16 when I graduated from high school, and I went for a year to the University of California because it was thought that the University of Tennessee wasn't good enough in those days. So I had to go out of state anyway. So I went to the University of California. Then that summer when I was 17 and a half, I joined the Navy and went to boot camp and medical corps school in the Navy. And then after a short period of work in a hospital in California, the war ended, but there was an opportunity to volunteer for the Bikini atom bomb tests. Now, in the meantime, my father had been appointed to be the medical director of those Bikini atom bomb tests, and he pulled strings when I volunteered. He suggested I volunteer, and when I volunteered, he pulled strings so that I was appointed to his radiation safety section. At that time, I was a pharmacist mate 3rd class, very elevated position. And so I went to a damage control school for a little bit, and I learned how to repair a Geiger counter. And then I was transferred to the USS Haven, a hospital ship in the Bay of San Francisco, where my father was and all the radiation safety people were.
May I interrupt and ask a question or two?
Certainly, that's my sister Jane Larson who's asking this question.
I would like to ask you to back up just a wee bit and explain a little more your training in the Navy before you went to the hospital and what you did in the hospital before the war ended.
Well, I went to boot camp at Great Lakes Training Center.
For how long?
For, I guess it was about 3 months. And that was where they inducted sailors. And, you know, we had marching and discipline. We all lived in the barracks. We learned a few things like tying knots and things, but largely it was to infuse some discipline and to get the recruits used to the idea they had to take orders. Now, and then we took exams to qualify or not for special schools. And at that time, being the son of a doctor whom I admired, I thought I was going to be a doctor, so I passed these tests and volunteered for the medical corps, thinking I would learn while I was in the Navy. So then they sent me to the medical corps training school in San Diego, California. And I went out there for, I can't remember how long at this time. It was probably 4 months.
Is that all? And why was it so?
Well, it was a cram course of memorization of medical terms. A medical corpsman is a glorified nurse, probably an unglorified nurse. You know, you work as an assistant to a doctor. And anyway, I graduated from that and then was assigned to a hospital, and I became a hospital in San Leandro, California. I had a choice, so I picked that because it was right near Hayward, where a lot of our relatives live. And I became an assistant to a GU specialist. Which is not, well, it was a male gynecologist. Oh, there was a man who dealt with syphilis and all sorts of diseases like that. So I didn't enjoy that too much. Maybe that's what persuaded me not to go further into medicine. But in any event, as I related, we finally sailed out of the Golden Gate on the USS Haven, and I was very seasick, as I think most people are on the first travel out Golden Gate. And we arrived in the atoll of Bikini. I was assigned for the first shot to a destroyer that was downwind from the Bikini Atoll. The first shot was in the atmosphere, and while we were waiting for the shot, the destroyer lay powerless. I mean, it just turned off its engines and laid in the water, which was very calm, and the sailors spent their time shark hunting. What they did is they got ropes with grapnels on it and put big slices of salami on it, and then would catch sharks and partly butcher them and throw them back over, and then chum with the blood and agony of the other sharks for other sharks. We got dozens of sharks, and I remember sleeping in the destroyer. The beds in the destroyer were 5 feet long, and my feet stuck out into the gangway. And every 4 hours, the watch changed, and the guys would charge down the gangway. My feet would hit the perpendicular bracing for the beds. It wasn't made for tall people. In any event, I also remember that first shot. There was a sign. I remember this kind of vaguely, but there was a scientist on that ship who determined that he was going to cause a line to be engraved on his retina, and so that he could use it in experiments in the future to measure things with. So he had fitted up we were supposed to look away when the bomb went off, but he wouldn't look away, and he had made a little tool to put over his eye with a little slit on it, and he was going to look at the bomb and get that line engraved. And he did that, and I don't know how successful he was on the line. But that
Do you
is...
remember his name?
No, I do not. No. But that's one of the ridiculous things that happened down there. I also remember after that first shot, it's amazing what one remembers. I remember I was just 18, but we went back then to the atoll, and we had a little recreation. And at the atoll, they had, of course, moved off all the islanders, but they then had recreation for the sailors there and the personnel of the task force. What they did is they put a barbed wire fence down the middle of that atoll, and on one side of the barbed wire fence, they had a little building they had built for officers, nurses, and waves. And the other side were the enlisted men. And that irritated me, but what really irritated me was that on the officers' side, they had a shark net. And on our side, they didn't have a shark net. That's right. That's what the services were in those days, especially the Navy. It was very castrated. The second, I remember a lot, I guess then the second blast, I was in a sort of like a PT boat. It wasn't really, though, but it was a very small craft with a Geiger counter and another guy or two. And the second blast was underwater, and it was so bad it lifted a ship up the side of the column, and you could see it from where we were. It was a most astounding sight. I still remember it very vividly, with color coming through the water, almost like rainbow, from the heat of the bomb itself. Afterwards, then, we went in as close as our Geiger counters would permit us, because the Navy wanted to save the ships. The ships had been oriented around the bomb in varying distances away from the bomb, and some, of course, were sinking, and they wanted to save the ships. And I know my father had a lot of trouble with Admiral Blandy and some of the other Navy men who resented this colonel telling hardened battle people that they couldn't go on these ships because of some invisible danger that they didn't really perceive. They didn't think it was real. That's all hearsay, however, because I was not in those meetings, obviously. After that second test, I remember we had lots. I really enjoyed myself. with my little Geiger counter. We went out on the reefs. I remember going out with a Dr. Donaldson, who was a professor of biology at the University of Washington, who became famous in later life for crossing salmon with steelhead, and he was quite a guy. And anyway, we had there was another man in this group, another biologist, Plonky or something like that, who later became rich selling salmon eggs for fishing. You know, you used to be able to, you could buy little bottles of salmon eggs that you use for trout fishing. Well, he invented the method of doing that, and his name was on a lot of bottles of salmon eggs.
Oh,
So anyway, we did that. I can remember finding these giant clams that open up and you put your foot in and they close. And then then if the tide rises, you drown. And it was really an interesting experience.
Did anybody do that?
Well, it's alleged, but not in the task force, I believe. Another thing I remember from those days was that that at night, the plankton, apparently in the day, the plankton, which are little minuscule organisms that a lot of the fish like whales feed on, at night, during the daytime, they go down to deeper levels. And at night, they come up again. Well, the plankton had become radioactive by the underwater explosion. So when they came up, the radiation level increased significantly in the lagoon, and after a while they had to move the fleet out just because of that one phenomenon. In the event, I remember then, sort of tie this off, we all went home. I remember Dad slept all the way back on the boat. He was exhausted. When we got back, we returned at that time to Rochester.
One question: were you with Dad on the boat, or were you?
No, I was down with the enlisted people, and Dad was in officer country. Then, just to end it on a nice note, then my dad and mother and myself, Dad and I both got out of the service about the same time, and we went to the Margaree River in Nova Scotia and went salmon fishing. And I remember that very well. I think I don't know where Dodge was. You were still in Oak Ridge, I believe, Jane.
That's right.
Dodge did not go to that.
No, Dodge. You might have been.
But that we had a great time. I remember I had a little trout fishing fly rod, and I caught a 35-pound salmon on it, and the rod fell apart. And I was trying to put the rod on and keep the fish on, and it took me an hour and a half, and the pole was permanently bent after it. But I caught the fish, and it was quite exciting.
Oh, that's neat.
So we had a good time. So Clarence, I think I've run out right now.
All right, fine. Well, that's chapter 1.
Chapter 1.
And
well, here I am back after recharging my batteries. And when I came back from Bikini, I of course had a year of college. And my family was living in Rochester, so I went to the University of Rochester for about 6 months. My brother Roger Dodge was also going at that time. But then my father was hired by the University of California to start a new medical school in Los Angeles, at the University of California in Los Angeles. So we transferred to UCLA, both my brother and I can remember he and I driving out to California from Rochester in a beat-up car that belonged to my family. And in the middle of the Painted Desert, it broke down, and my brother and I had to hitchhike, and we carried a generator out. And my brother is very good at these things. I was always encouraging him to do all the work because he's very hand-oriented. But anyway, then I can remember driving through the Mojave Desert into Los Angeles. No, it was Yuma. and it was terribly hot. We had no air conditioning, of course. In any event, we arrived in time to go to the Rose Bowl. I remember that. Anyway, we went to UCLA. I had a very good time at UCLA. I switched out of pre-med and spent most of the time just engulfing myself in the humanities, which I hadn't had any of in my schooling. I took an awful lot of philosophy and political theory and things like that. I remember one summer, however, I did something adventurous. I took a bus up to Seattle and then went steerage up the inland passageway to Alaska, where I had a job on a fishing boat, a fishing boat for a cannery. We didn't fish with lines. What we did is we went out on this boat to fish traps. What they did is off the coast of Alaska, this is the panhandle of Alaska, they trailed a chain together stream of logs, and then under the logs were sunk a long net, so that with sinkers on the bottom, so that the salmon coming up the coast would follow this net out, and then there was what they call then there was a trap, which is a big floating log contrivance with a series of nets hung from it that were concentric, so that the fish could go in, but he couldn't find the way out. And then we would go out there, and on each one of these traps would be a little log cabin, and there would be somebody there tending the trap. And what he was doing was not tending it, but he was protecting it from fish pirates. What would happen is that at night, these fish pirates would come up with another boat, shine a searchlight on this little cabin, and then and maybe fire a shot with a rifle and tell the trap tender they had to stay in his cabin, and then they would go in and empty out all the fish. Also, these poor these trap tenders, if there was a very bad storm, they had a rowboat, and they had to row to the shore, which was rocky and wild and everything else. It was a very dangerous job, because if they didn't want to row in the rough seas, and so they waited until the end, till the last moment to row, and then they'd have to row in very rough seas to make the shore. So it was a dangerous job. But in any event, on the fishing boat, I was a group of guys with strong backs and weak minds, and we went in and scooped out these big king salmon, coho salmon, and dog salmon. It's funny, I remember those names. And then take them back to the cannery. And we worked all summer, and it was, Alaska must have been then, probably still is, like the United States was when it was first discovered. It was virgin forest and just bursting with game and wild ducks that were so fat they took a half a mile to take off from the water. Then, when I graduated from UCLA, I applied for Rhodes Scholarship, and I won the state of California competition. But in those days, at least, perhaps till today, they then went on, and you had to win a group of 9 states. So you were competing with a second group. Well, the other 8 states were all the desert states, and I thought that since I had won the state of California, I had it knocked, and I was all ready to go to England, and I lost. So then I still had GI Bill left, so I applied to the London School of Economics because I wanted to go to England. And I got accepted. So I went to the London School of Economics after I graduated from UCLA. And I remember we went on a boat. I went on a boat from Quebec. This boat had taken immigrants from Italy. And it was filthy dirty. There were rats on it. But I had a great time. And I remember we landed in Cherbourg, and I went on a train. It was in the evening, train to Paris, and we came out of the Paris Underground from the railroad station. I had met some other students on the boat. We came up out on the left bank, and the chestnut trees were in bloom, and there was a big statue of Balzac by Rodin. and the cafes were all ablaze, and there was singing, and it was a very romantic time.
Fascinating.
And that summer, then I went early in the summer, and I spent that summer in France, and then went back to England and enrolled in the London School of Economics. The London School of Economics, I didn't work terribly hard. Every chance I had, I toured. I went to Scotland on that Christmas. Another guy and myself, Canadian, no, he's not a Canadian, he's an American who's now a staff member in the Congress. He and we were so cold. In England, it was in 1950, and it was after the end of the war, and there was no central heating. The flat I had, you had a electric element, and you had to put a sixpence in it to get the electricity to burn for a while. And I can remember sitting and studying in my little room in somebody else's flat with a blanket, with this element between my legs, a blanket around my legs, and then smelling my hair burning. Hair of my legs burning. So we had ration. I had meat once a week. So we were pretty squirrely. So he and I went south, looking for the sun. We got to southern France. It was still cold. We got to Spain. It was still cold. We got to Gibraltar. We crossed over into Spanish Morocco. And it was still cold, but we had to give up at that time. We got to Ceuta in Spanish Morocco, the capital of Spanish Morocco. We saw a belly dance, and then we turned around and came back up. Then that summer, in 1951, I was president of the London School of Economics graduate students, and there was a graduate, so I got to know everybody there. And there was a girl whose name was Irene Tinker, who was quite wealthy apparently. And she had written she wanted to write her thesis to get a degree on the Indian representative institutions for India. So she wanted to go to India, and she decided that why waste a wonderful experience by going by boat? So she bought a car, and she decided she was going to drive to India, and she then looked around for people to go with her. Well, she got an Englishman named Alan Day to go, and then she got me to go. Alan put some money in, and I convinced her that I was a great mechanic, and because of my pharmacist mate background, I was also a medical man. So Irene was quite a liberated gal and quite persuasive. And one of the real problems with this trip was the intervening countries many of them were totalitarian and hard to get into. But she found that several princes of these countries were attending Oxford. She went up there. She got visas to every place. So eventually, anyway, we took off in our English Ford Anglia, and went
in the summer.
In the summer of '51. And we crossed the English Channel on a boat, and then we crossed the Bosphorus from Istanbul into Turkey in a boat. Every other mile was by land. And we had a very wonderful time, and I can't believe why my family let me do it, because it was sort of dangerous, really. We were the first people to do this. We went there's several dangerous parts from Baghdad, from Amman to Baghdad, Amman, Jordan to Baghdad. We went by compass for a little bit, and then we followed a pipeline across the desert. There was no road.
Gee.
And
no road at all?
Well, it was desert, and there probably was a track from some car passing along the pipeline. We followed the pipeline, so we didn't get lost. And the problem with that Ford Anglia, it had leaf springs, and I was always, after we first broke the leaf springs, I had to go to the native quarters of each city and find a blacksmith to make me new leaf springs. So after the first set of leaf springs, the iron was absolutely terrible, and the leaf springs would break at the so then I was scared I'd break the axle. And I remember one time in Afghanistan waking up in the back seat, and Alan was driving, and he hit a chuck hole, and Irene hit him in the eye and gave him a black eye. So our tension was so bad and everything. We carried jerry cans on the side, on our fenders, and on the top of water and gasoline. And I have, of course, a lot of pictures of this trip. In Kabul, Afghanistan, I was offered 100 gold Napoleons for Irene. And by that time, I was prepared to sell. You know what I mean? So we had a very interesting time on that trip.
Now, weren't you at the Khyber Pass? Didn't somebody want you to smuggle arms?
No, but in Kabul, which is before the Khyber Pass is from Kabul, which is the capital of Afghanistan, over into Pakistan. I mean, you go into old British India there at the Khyber. We went through the Khyber. But when we were in Kabul, there is a big tribe of Afghanis called Pashtuns. I guess they're pronounced both ways. Anyway, this big tribe that's really on both sides of the border. And a lot of these refugees today must be of that tribe because they go over to their cousins and uncles on the other side of the Pakistan. But these people have been irredentalists. They wanted to have their own nation, Pashtunistan Day, the Pashtunistan it was called. And at that time, the Afghans were supporting them because they were trying to break up Pakistan. And they were trying to. So they had when we were there was a big Pashtunistan Day or something. I had to really need my notes. And we had every man there had a homemade rifle, and they had big dances and celebrations. There was a king in those days, and king of Afghanistan. And we were also, I'll tell you another very interesting story. We went through Iran, and in the eastern part of Iran, which borders Afghanistan, there is a city called Mashhad, and it is only about 60 miles also from the Russian border. There was an American consulate there and a radio station, obviously spying on Russia. But when we drove into Mashhad, we had stayed at a caravanserai one day out, caravanserai is where you have a sort of mud fort. You drive in, park the car, and you sleep on the top of the roof, on rugs, and they give you tea and some sort of food. And Irene had met a Iranian newspaper lady there who turned out to be the Communist Party magazine editor, and her husband. I guess the editor was the husband. In those days, there had been forgotten the name of the man. An Iranian very radical prime minister for those days had kicked out the Shah, and he was the prime minister, and we were having a lot of trouble with him. Later on, Roosevelt and the CIA overthrew this guy, and the Shah came back. But at that time, in any event, America was in a very delicate situation in Iran, and Iran was on the verge of, they were trying to be very independent, and they were fighting with us. In any event, we came into Mashhad, and we stopped.
Yeah, to interrupt there, that was the prime minister was it Mossadegh?
Mossadegh. Thank you, Clarence. That was the.
And that was very critical. Those were very critical times.
Those are very critical times. That's right. And
so you were in some danger. Or could have been?
Well, not just then, but we became sort of invaded. What happened was that we went to the consulate, and the consul and his wife were delighted to see us. You know, we were the only Westerners that had been in that city for months. And so they arranged a dinner party that night. And all the Westerners in town, there was a banker and a few others would come to the consulate. We were going to stay there that night and so on. And Alan was sick. He wasn't too healthy. And I took the car and an interpreter that the consul gave me, went down to get some new leaf springs, you know, as my usual job. And when I came back, I found that Irene was gone. And everybody knew, including the Iranian servants, knew where she'd gone. She had met this lady, newspaper editor, and they had put on these big chadors or whatever they are, that sort of a black tent-like affair that the women have to wear. And they had gone to go into the big Shiite shrine there, which is a big Muslim holy church. And this Irene, of course, was an infidel. And the consul was scared to death that she would be stoned. If they found her, she would have been stoned to death. And so I went down there with the interpreter and the consul. And we went in. No, I had to stay outside, but the interpreter went in. But he couldn't go to all the women. The women, besides, were in a different story. I mean, I guess he could talk to them or something. But he couldn't go around saying, "Are you there, Irene?" So he came back, and we went back to the consulate. And then the dinner party arrived, and Irene arrived finally 2 hours later. The coldest social atmosphere I've ever seen. But anyway.
Boy.
So we went through to and over the Khyber Pass into Pakistan, and I took a train from New Delhi to Bombay, and then a ship back through the Red Sea and the Canal, Mediterranean to England. Now, see what else did we do then?
Well, we visited you and we took a trip.
That's right. At the end of my second year there, Jane and Mother came over, and I joined them, and we visited. We toured England. Mother had a thing about Roman ruins. She had to see every ruin. She reminds me a lot of Roger. Roger loves castles. Every old castle we have to see. Mother wanted to see Roman ruins. So we looked at a lot of Roman ruins in England, and then we went to the continent. And Jane remembers, I didn't, that Mother, Jane and I wanted to go to Vienna, which was then in Russian hands. And Mother was scared to death that my name was very similar to my father's, and my father, of course, was privy to a lot of very classified information in the nuclear weapons program. So she was afraid that I would be kidnapped or something. So I don't remember that, but I'm sure that's true.
That was correct.
So she didn't go.
That's right. She stayed in
Brussels?
Innsbruck.
Innsbruck? But I'm surprised. Well, I guess she felt she couldn't tell me I couldn't go. Anyway, Jane and I went, and sure enough, as we crossed into the Russian zone, the Russian soldiers took me off the train. It turned out, and it was that my passport had not been properly stamped.
That's right.
And Jane, foolishly, but very loyally, came with me. Of course,
I had to throw my suitcase out the window. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
And then I rushed out before the train could start up.
I thought, I had heard stories about Russian rape and all that, and so Jane was scared for me, and I was scared for her, and here we sat in this little cubicle with a Russian soldier and with a sergeant and a Tommy gun, and I was showing him a Time magazine that had a picture of Eisenhower on it, and trying to get a conversation going.
And he pointed to Eisenhower and he said, "No good general." Real mad. And there was a picture, a photograph of Berea on the wall with roses. Do you remember a little vial of roses underneath?
Oh, was that before Berea was killed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose we were in a little bit of danger. But actually...
Actually, we weren't, but we could have been, you know.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. So after that, then we all returned to the United States, and I
Well, now, but you didn't say that we... I'm sorry, should I interrupt you?
Go ahead, yeah.
Do you remember then they put us on the train going back to Innsbruck? And there we were so defiant that you got your passport properly stamped, and we got right back on the train, much to Mother's distress. And then we went to Vienna the next day.
Yes.
And we had that wonderful evening in the cafe. Do you remember where they that Viennese lady serenaded you? She was a singer, and wanted so badly to come to the United States and be an opera star. And she had, of course, no hope. And Vienna was badly damaged in the war, and they were all war-weary people. But they serenaded us and gave us flowers in the cafe that night.
Yeah, I remember the music. Yes, it was lovely.
Yeah.
Can we stop now, Clarence? I've run out again.
All right, very good.